Have you ever wondered what it would take to make you confess to something you didn't do? Forget the Hollywood theatrics, the bright lights, the shouting. The real pressure is silent. It's a psychological game played by masters of the human mind. The FBI estimates that in high-stakes interrogations, purely physical evidence only solves a fraction of cases. The rest? They're cracked open by exploiting the invisible scripts that run our lives, our fears, our vanities, our desperate need to be understood. Ted Bundy, the monster who denied his crimes for years, didn't break because of a new piece of evidence. He broke because an interrogator offered him a story, a psychological off-ramp that made confessing feel less like an admission of evil and more like a moment of tragic weakness. That's the game. It's not about finding the truth. It's about constructing a path to it. Today, I'm going to pull back the curtain on 7 of the most potent mind games used by federal interrogators. And my purpose here isn't to teach you how to manipulate people. It's to arm you, to make you aware of the pressures that can be applied to you, your children, or your colleagues every single day, often without you even realizing it. This is about defense. The first and most foundational tactic is what the professionals call the confrontation phase, a cornerstone of the Reed technique. This isn't about yelling. It's about creating an undeniable reality. The interrogator enters the room with an absolute, unshakable certainty of the suspect's guilt and states it as a fact. "John, the investigation is over. We have the evidence, and we know you did this. There is no room for debate. The case is, for all intents and purposes, closed. The psychological impact is immense. The suspect's denial system, their prepared lies, their entire defensive wall, it's hit with a battering ram. Consider the case of Samuel Little, the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. For decades, he floated from state to state, a ghost the system could never pin down. When Texas Ranger James Holland finally sat down with him, he didn't ask Little if he committed murders. He confronted him with facts, with timelines, with a deep knowledge of his life. He laid out the truth as he saw it, creating an environment where denial seemed pointless, even absurd. He wasn't asking for information, he was confirming what he already claimed to know. This direct confrontation removes the suspect's power. It forces their brain to switch from, "How do I get away with this?" to "How do I manage the consequences?" That is a seismic shift. I remember a case from my early days, a corporate controller named Frank. A quiet man, meticulous, went to church every Sunday. But the numbers weren't adding up, hundreds of thousands were missing. For weeks, the internal investigation went nowhere. Frank had an answer for everything. So I was brought in. I didn't walk in with a file full of questions. I walked in, sat down, looked him right in the eye and said, "Frank, we know about the transfers to the offshore account. We know how you did it. This conversation isn't about what happened. It's about what happens next. I didn't have the offshore records. I had a strong suspicion, but my certainty became his reality." His body language told the whole story. The immediate tensing of the shoulders, the fidgeting with his wedding ring, the break in eye contact. Those are classic signs of a brain under siege, scrambling to reconcile a lie with an overwhelming new reality. It's the fight-or-flight response kicking in, but there's nowhere to run. Psychologically, this tactic exploits our deep-seated aversion to being definitively caught. As long as there is ambiguity, the liar has hope. The confrontation phase is designed to extinguish that hope entirely. So, here's a question for you. Have you ever been in a situation, maybe a simple argument at home, where someone confronts you with such absolute certainty that you begin to question your own memory? It's a powerful tool, and it's used in boardrooms and on sales floors every day. Awareness is the first step to defending against it. Confrontation is a battering ram, but you can't use a battering ram on every door. Some minds are too fortified for a direct assault. For them, the interrogator needs a key, not a hammer. This brings us to the second, more surgical mind game, the alternative question technique. This is where the true artistry of psychological manipulation comes into play. Instead of asking, "Did you do it?" which invites a simple no, the interrogator offers two possible explanations for the crime. One makes the suspect look like a cold, calculating monster. The other paints them as a flawed but understandable human being who made a terrible mistake. The question is no longer if they did it, but why. The classic example, of course, is Ted Bundy. For his final interviews, investigators knew a direct confess your crimes approach was useless. He was a narcissist who saw himself as a genius. So they gave him an out. They framed the question in a way that protected his ego. It went something like this. Were these acts something you planned out meticulously, like a predator hunting its prey? Or was it something that just took over you? A moment of passion, an impulse you couldn't control? You see the genius in that? It gave Bundy a choice. He could either be a monster by design or a victim of his own dark urges. He chose the latter because it allowed him to confess while still positioning himself as a complex, tragic figure rather than just a butcher. This technique works by lowering the psychological cost of confession. Our brains are wired to avoid what S called cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs. In this case, I am a good person, and I did a terrible thing. By offering a more socially or morally acceptable reason for the bad act, the interrogator provides a bridge. They give the suspect a story they can tell themselves, a way to resolve that dissonance. The confession becomes the easier path. I handled a case involving a teenager, let's call him Leo, who was caught on camera vandalizing a local business. He was defiant, sullen, wouldn't say a word. His parents were at their wits' end. I sat with him, and I could see the wall he had built. Shouting at him would have been useless. So I tried a different approach. I said, "Leo, I've seen the tape. There's no question what happened. My only question is about you. Were you out there trying to be a tough guy, showing off for your friends and trying to prove something? Or were you just angry? Angry about something at home, something at school, and you made a mistake and took it out on the wrong thing?" I leaned in on the second option. I gave him the understandable choice. After a long silence, he mumbled, "I was just angry." And from there, the whole story unraveled. He wasn't a hardened criminal, he was a kid in pain, but I never would have gotten there with a direct confrontation. I had to give him a door that wasn't labeled, "I am a bad person." Think about your own life. Have you ever seen this used? A parent might ask a child, "Did you lie to me because you're dishonest, or were you just scared of getting in trouble?" An employer might ask an employee, "Did you miss this deadline because you don't care about your job, or were you just completely overwhelmed with the other projects we gave you?" It's a way of cornering someone while offering them a soft place to land. It feels like empathy, but it's a calculated strategy. The next time you're in a difficult conversation, listen closely. Are you being asked a question, or are you being offered a choice between two prepackaged stories? When certainty doesn't break them and offering a softer story doesn't coax them out, an interrogator might decide to build a cage around the suspect, a cage made of lies. This brings us to our third mind game, a controversial but brutally effective tactic, the false evidence ploy. In the United States, it is legally permissible for law enforcement to lie to a suspect about the evidence they possess. Let that sink in. They can tell you they have your fingerprints on a weapon when they don't. They can claim an accomplice has already confessed when they haven't. They can say they have video footage that simply does not exist. This isn't about presenting evidence, it's about making the suspect believe the evidence is overwhelming and inevitable. The psychology here is potent. It attacks the suspect's sense of control and their ability to assess their situation. The moment they believe irrefutable evidence exists, their internal calculation changes. The goal is no longer to maintain their innocence, but to mitigate the damage. The fear of being exposed by a piece of damning evidence, a fingerprint, a DNA sample, a secret recording, is often more powerful than the evidence itself. The suspect's own imagination becomes the interrogator's most powerful weapon. They start to spiral thinking, how did they get that? What else do they have? My story won't hold up. The lie creates a panic that a simple question never could. Let me tell you about Margaret, a woman suspected of orchestrating a sophisticated insurance fraud scheme after her business burned down. She was smart, poised, and had a plausible explanation for everything. She claimed to be a victim. For 2 interviews, she didn't give an inch. So, for the 3rd meeting, I brought in a prop, a standard evidence bag containing a burned, melted electronic device. It was a worthless piece of junk we pulled from the rubble. I placed it on the table between us and said, "Margaret, the forensics team managed to recover the hard drive from your office server. They're working on pulling the data now. They tell me it could take 24 hours, but they're confident they can recover the last files that were deleted before the fire." Her composure cracked. Not all at once, but in tiny fissures. A slight widening of the eyes. A press of her lips. She had no idea what was on that drive, or what was recoverable, but she knew what she had deleted. My bluff forced her to gamble. She could either maintain her lie and pray the non-existent data didn't condemn her, or she could get ahead of it and shape the narrative herself. She spent the next 10 minutes trying to remember some financial difficulties and mistakes she had made. She was trying to inoculate herself against the evidence she believed was coming. By the end of the hour, we had a full confession. The key wasn't the piece of junk in the bag, it was the story I built around it. This happens more than you think in the civilian world. In a business negotiation, someone might say, "We've received a much better offer from your competitor." It might be a complete bluff, but it's designed to make you panic and change your position. In a personal relationship, a suspicious partner might say, "I know you were at that bar last night, my friend saw you. It's a shot in the dark, but it's designed to provoke a reaction." The defense against this is simple, but it isn't easy. Remain calm and stick to the facts you know. Don't let someone else's claims, especially when unsubstantiated, become your reality. So, ask yourself this: how would you react if you were innocent, but an authority figure told you they had DNA proof of your guilt? Would your composure hold? Once an interrogator has a suspect cornered, whether through direct confrontation or a clever bluff, the real work of extracting a detailed confession begins. This requires manipulating the suspect's emotional state, making them feel both terrified of the consequences and understood in their motivations. This psychological seesaw is our 4th mind game, the strategic use of minimization and maximization. These are 2 sides of the same coin, used in tandem to create a state of profound anxiety and a desperate need for resolution. The interrogator becomes both the source of the pain and the only path to relief. Maximization is the fear play. The interrogator paints the grimmest possible picture of the suspect's future. They don't just talk about jail time, they talk about the brutal realities of prison life. They emphasize the most severe charges, the longest possible sentences, the devastating impact on the suspect's family, reputation, and life. You're not just looking at theft, you're looking at armed robbery. That's a federal offense. The DA is a bulldog, he's going to make an example of you. You'll lose your house, your family will be ostracized, and you'll be an old man by the time you see the outside again. The goal is to induce a feeling of hopelessness, to make the suspect feel that their situation is absolutely dire and that the walls are closing in completely. Then, just when the pressure is at its peak, the interrogator pivots to minimization. They suddenly become understanding, almost sympathetic. They downplay the moral severity of the crime. Look, anyone in your position would have felt desperate. The economy is tough. You were about to lose your business. You made a bad choice, but you're not a bad person. This wasn't about greed, it was about survival. I've seen this 100 times. It's a mistake, and a mistake can be dealt with. This provides a stark contrast to the terrifying scenario painted just moments before. It offers a psychological lifeline, a way for the suspect to see their actions as a forgivable error rather than a mark of pure evil. I worked a case involving a young man who had gotten into a bar fight that ended with the other man in critical condition. He was claiming self-defense, but the evidence was shaky. He was terrified but stonewalling. My partner on the case was a master of this technique. He started with maximization, laying out the felony assault charges, the potential for a manslaughter charge if the victim died, the years he'd lose. The kid was pale, shaking. Then my partner's tone shifted completely. He leaned forward and said quietly, "Let me ask you something. Did you go in there looking for a fight? Or did this guy push you? Did he say something about your girlfriend? I've been in that situation. Your adrenaline is pumping. You're not thinking straight. You just react. Anyone would. It's not a cold-blooded attack, it's a human reaction." The kid visibly deflated with relief. By minimizing the intent, my partner gave him a story that recast him as a victim of circumstance, not an aggressor. The full, detailed confession followed almost immediately. This psychological dance is incredibly effective because it hijacks our natural desire to move away from pain and toward relief. Maximization creates the pain. Minimization offers the only apparent escape route. Have you ever been in a performance review where your boss starts by listing all your shortcomings and the serious consequences, only to soften at the end and say, "But we know you're capable, and we just want to help you get there"? It's a common management tactic. It leaves you feeling rattled but also grateful, and more compliant. Reflect on this. Which of these tactics would be more potent against you? The fear of the worst-case scenario, or the relief of being told you're understood? So far, we've discussed tactics that are confrontational, deceptive, or manipulative in a direct way. But perhaps the most insidious and often most effective mind game is the one that doesn't feel like a game at all. It feels like friendship. This is our fifth tactic, rapport building and betrayal. This is the classic good cop routine taken to a masterful level. It's not about one officer being nice while another is mean. It's about a single interrogator building a genuine or seemingly genuine emotional bond with a suspect and then weaponizing that trust. This process is a slow burn. The interrogator doesn't come in hot with accusations. They come in with a cup of coffee. They talk about the weather, about sports, about their kids. They look for common ground. Did the suspect grow up in the same area? Do they follow the same football team? Do they both have a parent who struggled with an illness? The interrogator shares personal stories, admits their own flaws, and presents themselves as a regular person who is just there to do a job. They listen more than they talk. They validate the suspect's feelings of frustration, anger, or fear. They create a small island of safety and understanding in the middle of a terrifying ocean of trouble. The goal is to make the suspect forget they are talking to law enforcement and feel like they are confiding in a friend, the only person in the world who truly understands their situation. I had an old partner, Detective Miller, who was a virtuoso of this. He could find common ground with anyone. I remember a case with a getaway driver in a robbery that went bad. The suspect was a young man, barely out of his teens, and he was loyal to his friends, refusing to talk. Miller spent the first 2 sessions, hours, just talking to him about cars. Miller was a gearhead, and so was this kid. They talked about carburetors, transmission ratios, the classic muscle cars they loved. Miller told him about the Mustang he restored with his own father. He built a bridge. By the 3rd session, the kid was looking forward to talking to him. Miller was his guy. And then came the betrayal. It was quiet and devastating. Miller leaned in and said, "Look, we've talked a lot, and I feel like I know you. You're a good kid who fell in with the wrong people, and I know you're loyal, but I have to tell you something because I like you." "Your friend? The shooter? He's in the next room, and he's telling them the whole thing was your idea. He's saving himself, and he's going to let you take the fall for all of it." In that single moment, the trust Miller had built was converted into leverage. The feeling of being understood was replaced by the horror of being betrayed by his actual friend. The suspect's loyalty shattered, and he clung to the only other friend he had in the building, Detective Miller. The full confession was a torrent. This exploits one of the most fundamental human needs, the need for connection and belonging. When we feel isolated and afraid, We are incredibly vulnerable to anyone who offers empathy. The betrayal phase works by framing the confession not as a surrender to an adversary, but as a choice to side with the only person who has shown you kindness. Have you ever confided in a co-worker who seemed like a friend, only to find out they used your words against you with management? It's the same principle, just with lower stakes. It's a painful reminder that rapport can be a tool, not just a relationship. Ask yourself, what is the fastest way someone has ever earned your trust? And was that trust ever used in a way you didn't expect? We've explored psychological force, trickery, and emotional manipulation. But what happens when a suspect is too disciplined for those? What if they are intelligent, prepared, and have a high degree of self-control? For these targets, interrogators turn to a method that resembles a brute force cyber attack on the human brain. This is our sixth mind game, cognitive overload. The strategy is simple in principle, but complex in execution. Overwhelm the suspect's mental processing power to the point where they can no longer maintain their lies. Lying is hard work. Telling the truth is relatively easy, you simply recall a memory. But constructing and maintaining a lie requires a tremendous amount of cognitive energy. You have to invent the false narrative, ensure it's internally consistent, remember all the details you've made up, and constantly monitor it against the known facts to avoid contradiction. At the same time, you have to manage your own behavior, suppress signs of nervousness, and watch the interrogator for feedback. This all draws heavily on what psychologists call working memory, our brain's temporary storage and processing hub. The problem for the liar is that working memory has a very limited capacity. The cognitive overload technique is designed to deliberately exceed that capacity. The interrogator will rapid-fire questions, often jumping between different topics, timelines, and levels of detail. Where were you at 8 p.m. on Tuesday? Who did you call from your cell phone at 8:15? What was the name of the bartender? You said you paid with cash, but your credit card statement shows a charge from a gas station 10 miles away at 8:40. Was the car you were driving the blue sedan or your wife's SUV? The witness said the sedan. Why would they say that? The questions come faster than the suspect can process them. They are forced to juggle dates, times, names, and locations, all while trying to keep their fabricated story straight. I used this in a complex financial fraud case. The suspect was a brilliant but arrogant CFO. He had a perfectly rehearsed alibi. For the first hour, he was a brick wall. So we changed tactics. I had 2 other investigators join me. We began peppering him from all sides. One would ask about specific accounting ledgers, another about email chains, while I hammered him on his personal travel schedule and expenses. We threw transaction numbers, SEC regulations, dates, and names at him in a relentless, chaotic stream. We weren't even waiting for full answers. The goal was to flood his brain. After about 20 minutes of this, you could see the system crash. He started mixing up dates. He contradicted his earlier statements. His confident demeanor evaporated, replaced by frustrated exhaustion. In a moment of pure fatigue, trying to answer a question about a wire transfer, he said, "Because that's not where the money was supposed to go. It was the slip he had been working so hard to prevent. The dam had broken. This is not just about making someone tired. It's about systematically dismantling their ability to think clearly. It's like trying to run multiple complex software programs on an old computer. Eventually, the whole system freezes and crashes." You can see a low-stakes version of this in everyday life. Have you ever been in an argument with someone who starts bringing up past events, changing the subject, and throwing so many accusations at you at once that you just lose your train of thought and give up? That's cognitive overload. Your brain simply can't parry every thrust. It's a powerful weapon. So think about it. Under what circumstances does your own thinking get cloudy and overwhelmed? Recognizing your own cognitive limits is the first step in defending them. We've covered the verbal assault, the subtle trick, the emotional bond, and the mental blitz. But the final mind game we'll discuss is perhaps the most unnerving because it involves the complete absence of all of them. It is the disciplined, weaponized use of nothing at all. Our seventh and final tactic is silence and patience. In a world filled with noise, in an interrogation room filled with tension, silence is a vacuum that demands to be filled. And a skilled interrogator knows that more often than not, the suspect will be the one to fill it, often with incriminating information. The average person is deeply uncomfortable with silence in a social interaction. A pause of more than a few seconds can feel awkward, judgmental, or hostile. We are conditioned to keep conversation flowing. In an interrogation setting, this discomfort is magnified 1,000 times. The suspect is already in a state of high anxiety. When the interrogator asks a critical question, "Where were you on the night of the 15th?" and is met with a denial, they can choose to do something profoundly unsettling. Nothing. They don't argue. They don't challenge. They just hold eye contact and wait. This silence creates immense internal pressure on the suspect. Their mind begins to race. Do they know I'm lying? Did they see that twitch in my eye? Do they have a witness? Why aren't they saying anything? This silence is a trap. I need to say something to convince them. I need to explain more. I need to make this feel normal again. The suspect's own guilt and paranoia begin to do the interrogator's work for them. They feel a desperate compulsion to talk, to elaborate on their lie, to add details. And as anyone who has ever told a lie knows, the more details you add, the more opportunities you create to contradict yourself and get caught. I remember a very early case, a simple breaking and entering. The suspect was a young man, nervous, but sticking to his story that he was at a friend's house. I presented him with the one piece of solid evidence we had, a blurry security photo of a man in a similar jacket near the scene. I asked, "Is this you?" He said no. Instead of challenging him, I just slid the photo to the center of the table and leaned back in my chair. I didn't speak for what must have been 2 full minutes, though it felt like an hour. I just looked at him, then at the photo, then back at him. The silence in that little room was deafening. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and blurted out, "Look, I didn't take anything valuable." He had been sitting there in silence, arguing with himself, and his own conscience confessed for him. This is not just a police tactic. It is one of the most powerful tools in negotiation. After you state your price or your terms, the best thing you can do is stop talking. The person who speaks next is often the one who concedes. In a difficult conversation with a loved one, sometimes the most effective thing is to ask a difficult question and then allow them the space and silence to truly confront it, rather than jumping in to fill the void. The power of silence is the power of patience. It communicates confidence and control. The person who is comfortable with the silence is the person who is in charge. So ask yourself this: how long can you sit in a silent room with another person before your own anxiety compels you to speak? Learning to be comfortable in that void is a superpower, both in defending yourself and in navigating your life. Awareness is your best defense. Master the invisible scripts, or they will master you.